You're listening to Head to Head, a Star Wars podcast. Two fans, two generations, all things Star Wars begins now.
All right. Well, hello, everybody. I'm Eric Vansel.
And I'm Daryl Sanders.
And we're your hosts for the show. And unfortunately, we were going to bring you a whole little thing on the Obi-Wan Kenobi series and a little bit of news that we had there. But unfortunately, earlier today, we actually learned, and of course it was all over the news, that Carl Weathers passed away. And it basically came out of nowhere. And they still haven't really revealed the cause of death yet, have they?
No.
Yeah, they just said he died in his sleep, right?
Yeah, he passed yesterday in his sleep or something.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so, that was actually quite unexpected. So we thought, you know what, this would probably be a good time to pay tribute to him because, of course, we all know Carl Weathers in the Star Wars universe is Greef Karga, who starred in 3 seasons of The Mandalorian. And, I mean, I don't know if they actually shot anything for either the season 4 or the movie, or it's tough to say. I would say probably not, but you never know.
Yeah.
We never know really what's happening with the whole thing.
Yeah, and I've always kind of thought about it, man. Like, as some of our favorite actors of are aging, of course.
Mm-hmm.
And if you're going to use them in franchises, like, you better kind of get them and get all that you can out of them. As far as, I mean, I hate to say it like that, but
yeah, I know it.
You might want to get like if you want to use their voice or their likeness and stuff, like, if you planning on doing that, like, get that now. Like, Stallone's up there, Harrison Ford is up there,
Oh, yeah.
So of course we know Jeremy Earl Jones has given his blessing for, when he eventually transitions out of here, he's given his blessing that, the property can still use his voice for Vader. But yeah, man, this definitely came out of nowhere. I was just kind of at work and it popped up, and I'm just like, what? Like, okay.
Well, and I ended up, and the thing is, I ended up verifying it because there's so many like these hoax posts and all that stuff where, and I didn't want to we put together this whole show and then find out he's very much alive, and then you're kind of going, well, okay,
Right.
just kind of replay this when he does die, But I mean,
Well, just giving him his flowers now. He can smell them.
Yeah, exactly. We'll tag him in the post, right? But I mean,
like, if you were to go, this is what we would say.
Yeah, exactly. This is it right here. So, but I mean, the thing about it though is that it's just one of those things that not only did it come out of nowhere, but you're right. You do have to. I mean, on the one hand, you're sad for his family, his friends. It's a human being that actually passed away.
Absolutely.
I mean, we can't overlook that. But there are other two sides of this tripod, let's say, is one, you have, of course, the fan base who love all of his films. And that's one of the things that we thought we would do today, is that we're just going to pay tribute to him by each of us going over our 5 favorite roles that he played and maybe talk about maybe a favorite scene from each of the films. And of course, it's no surprise because he has played a bunch of iconic roles. I mean, I looked him up in IMDb. He actually had over 80 projects that he was in, which is way more than I anticipate. Because, he's one of those guys that either plays like these super iconic characters or he just pops up like out of nowhere. Like, one honorable mention I could say is he had a small role in this TV series Psych. And Psych was always one of my favorite shows, and I absolutely loved it. But, it's just kind of like the way that I did my list is it's like, okay, these are the 5 roles that are without question my favorite roles of his, but I was trying to weigh them, from 5 to 1 in such a way of the complexity of the role, just the iconic nature of it. There's a lot of different things, and of course we're going to say it, but I mean, spoiler alert, it turns out that we both had the same exact stuff. Like, there's no deviation. It's not one of those situations like we had one or two or whatever, like different roles. I mean, no, they're the exact same roles. They're just going to be in a different order. So, you're just going to have to bear with us on that. But yeah, Ronaldo chats and he goes, I was shocked when I heard this. Such an amazing actor. Rest in peace. And that's the thing is that, and we're going to go over this when we talk about his roles, but he actually had a lot of range. If you really look at even the roles that we're covering, some of them are okay. Yeah, I could see him playing this, but other ones, man, are just like all over the place.
Yeah, that's the thing about Carl Weathers is that we've seen him different uh, character and characters that you don't. You almost would think he would be a typecast actor, and not, because he can play. He can play, or he can give range even one character. Like, in Grief Karga, he's. We'll get into it, but like, he can be serious, but then he also could be kind of aloof and funny,
Yeah, exactly. And
he
you have to
has
have a range to pull that off,
Yeah, exactly.
All right. Well, I think that's a good enough intro. I mean, like I said, I mean, it's kind of tough. We really should probably get into this list, but it just, we're still kind of getting over the shock because honestly, I posted this on my social media and I'm like, I'm stunned. That's all I could say. Usually I'll just go, okay, he's one of my favorites or whatever. There's a bunch of movies I like and post something, but I'm like, I'm kind of stunned into silence right now because I had no idea there was anything wrong with him. I mean, sure, he wasn't, it wasn't like he was 30, but still.
Right.
Yeah, he seemed healthy enough. So, yeah, man, let's get into this. So for your number five, you chose Chubbs, the character from Happy Gilmore. And of course, the funny thing about this is that with this particular scene, I don't know, because again, we didn't really exchange like, okay, this is a favorite scene. So that part of the show is completely unrehearsed on our part. And naturally, right. I tried to choose, a couple of different photos because, again, we doubled up on, so spoiler alert, Chubbs is going to show up on my list too. But this was a scene where he was talking about, going to your happy place. And what I found interesting about this particular scene is he actually sings. He sings in this scene.
That was the thing. I was like, whoa, he doesn't have a bad voice.
He doesn't. No.
That's the thing. I was like, okay, Carl, that was a shocker for me. And I love, just when the first time he approaches, Happy, when he's taking like those baseballs or like those, to the chest because he wants to be a hockey player. And then Chubbs kind of walks over to him and he's trying to convince him to play golf. He's like, yeah, I'm going to teach you. And the whole time he has his hand behind his back. And you're just thinking like, a lot of those older gentlemen kind of walk like that. And then you find out like he's got this whole wooden hand and it freaks, Happy Gilmore out. And he's all touching him with it. And he's kind of like,
yeah, because it was
an alligator.
An alligator bit it off or something like that. Yeah, man.
He golfed and he went to go get the ball and the alligator jumped up and snatched his arm off. So, but the character was just so funny, man. I mean, and of course, that arm being like the source of like a lot of the gags that were going on in Happy Gilmore.
Yep.
I mean, it was just priceless. But yeah, that was one of the big things is, and him always making the joke and the reference. And of course, in this shot, he's like, look, I even got my hand, but
yeah, exactly. Yeah. Well, what was funny about it?
That was definitely hilarious.
Yeah, and the thing about it was, again, this is, and, like I said, we have this on different spots. We'll cover a little bit more when it, my turn comes up. But I mean, the only thing that I'll say right now is that this was probably, I could be wrong, but I think this was the first almost like out and out comedy that Carl Weathers did. This is like, and we found out he's just hilarious.
Hilarious, man.
Because with a lot of the other roles, they're similar. They're different, but there is a similarity with them. He kind of has that same delivery, that same thing.
Well, he comes with, he's definitely like one of those macho guys. And so when you see him in this capacity, for me, this is the first time I've ever seen him do comedy.
Yeah,
So I'm just like, when I first saw him, I'm like, no, is that Apollo? Like,
I know. I said
and
the
that's,
same thing. Like,
it's kind of, and I kind of had the same feeling that you all had when you saw Michael Keaton play Batman. Like,
yeah,
I mean, Beetlejuice
Mr.
is about to
Mom.
be Mr. Mom is
Yeah,
about to be Batman. Like, how?
exactly.
It's like, and that's kind of how I felt about this role. It was very off-putting, but then it was refreshing to find him actually funny.
Well, I will say this though. Speaking of Michael Keaton, and it's the same kind of deal. Like, it really depends on what you watch, because there's a movie that Michael Keaton did in the late 80s. I want to say, I think it was right before Batman, actually. I think it was like 87, 88, something like that. It was called Pacific Heights.
Oh yeah.
And he basically played this guy that rented this house from this couple. And he just systematically started destroying the house. And they couldn't get rid of him because of all the, like the squatter laws, or like there are all these like loopholes. This is actually the first movie that brought attention to that as a national thing. But he was so chilling and psychotic that was the first time that we saw a different side of Michael Keaton. So when it did come time for him to play Batman, I mean, I could have my timelines wrong. The movie could have been like in 91. It was right around there. I don't look it up for me, like Pacific Heights, what year it came out. It could have been like 91, 92, but I thought it was before Batman, but I could be wrong on that. Because there's another movie he did called Clean and Sober, which was another heavy dramatic role. So there were a
90.
couple of...
It was
90?
right after Batman.
Okay, so it was right after
Yes,
Batman. What about Clean and Sober? When did that come out? Because that was another one that was heavy.
88.
That was the one that's
Batman.
probably the one I'm thinking of. So that was the one before Batman. That was our first glimpse into like, oh, Michael Keaton can actually do, some not comedy. Drama. And that was the first time that we're like, oh, okay, he has more of a range. And like I said, in Pacific Heights, man, I mean, that movie was just, the way that he played that, he was literally scary. And that's something, obviously, after Batman, we saw a little bit more of that, but it was really cool. So I can't say enough about that. And with Carl Weathers, it's kind of the same thing. He would play something like Chubbs. And you're just, I mean, you're just sitting there going, this is amazing. I mean, first of all, Happy Gilmore is a classic.
Yeah.
Like everybody, Shooter McGavin. I mean, it's almost like every character in that movie was incredible.
You almost could do like a spinoff of all those characters.
You could. Yeah. You could easily make their own movie or something like that. I mean, it was really, just really different. All right. So my number five is from a film that actually gets forgotten by a lot of people. And by the way, we have a poll up on the channel, and I'm going to mention this, along with liking and subscribing to the channel and all that. We have a poll up right now in the community tab. If you guys go and look, we ask you what your favorite Carl Weathers role was. And we have a bunch of choices up there. And one of the choices that we have is my number 5, which, again, it's different on your list, but my number 5 is Jericho Jackson. And this is from the movie Action Jackson.
Action Jackson. Yep.
Action Jackson, which it almost seemed like it was, because this movie was made in 88, and I remember seeing it in the theater with my friends, actually, in Alabama. I had a couple of friends that moved down to Alabama. I went to visit them, and we went and saw this movie. And it was almost like a 80s spin on blaxploitation films, in a way. That's kind of the vibe that it had. But the thing that I thought was really cool, like, it was a little bit of a kind of a silly, fun action movie. But Craig T. Nelson played a really brutal character named Delaplane. And, there was a lot of kind of dark scenes in this film. Because Delaplane was a very dark character. And Action Jackson, the best way to describe it, it was almost like if The Last Action Hero took itself seriously. That's pretty much how it was.
Or Beverly Hills Cop.
Or Beverly Hills Cop. It did kind of have a Beverly Hills Cop vibe to it. And honestly, I was hoping that this would be a franchise when I first saw it.
Yeah. I'm surprised that didn't happen, honestly, quite honestly. I mean,
I think it was supposed to. But it was one of those situations where, it just didn't do as well in the box office. And, kind of like, all right, well, that's it for that one then.
Yeah.
But I mean, what's funny about it was, because obviously Carl Weathers was also in Predator. Sonny Lindham, who played, what was this character's name in Predator? He was kind of like the Indian guy, the American Indian looking dude. He was actually in Action Jackson. So it was like they were, and Action Jackson was made after Predator. So it was sort of like seeing these two guys in completely different roles was actually pretty funny. But if you guys haven't seen Action Jackson, and I can imagine, again, it was really popular and it kind of blew up there for like 6 months or whatever. And then it's basically been forgotten, but it's it's not going to win any Oscars or anything like that. But it was definitely a really fun, cool, Friday, Saturday night type popcorn action movie. And like I said, it had some drama to it too.
And it had the Lovely Vanity in there as well.
Yes, that's the other thing too, and that's probably one of
that
their
was still big in the 80s too. So that's coming off the Purple Rain and
well, because she wasn't. That's the thing that was funny about that was that Vanity was originally supposed to be in Purple Rain, and then she got fired, and Apollonia took over.
Right.
But she did, of course, have the Vanity Six, and she actually dated Nikki Sixx of Motley Crue for a while. And it was funny because he actually put on his arm, he had like a V tattoo for Vanity. And when they broke up, he was like, great, what am I going to do? So he put an I after it for the Roman numeral 6, Nikki Sixx, right? It's okay. Let's see. Ted Adam Green says, rest in peace, Apollo Creed. Yeah, it's a pretty, it's a sad day, man. That's why I'm glad that we're able to celebrate the life of this underrated actor, actually, in my opinion, with all you guys.
Absolutely.
All right, let's get to year number 4. Year number 4 is Jericho Jackson. I like that because actually, with a couple of these, it's sort of like we just had them, like one number apart, so we could just we could continue the conversation. It kind of makes it seamless. So, why did he appear on your list?
Yeah, I mean, Action Jackson. Yeah, I mean, well, first of all, I had to love it off the sheer fact that playing a Detroit cop, so that
yes,
cool.
Yes, that's true.
And I've always loved he always had a great look, and that's the thing about Carl Weathers, man. The guy always showed up ready to go, always stayed in shape, and that's why I think it was so surprising to me because even at 76 years old, he still was in phenomenal shape, to be a 76-year-old man. I mean, of course, the sands of time were picking pockets there a little bit. And of course, he's gained weight and things like that. But I mean, for most of his career, I mean,
that's true.
You see what I'm saying? Like, ever since I saw him in the, in Rocky, and that was in the 70s, he's pretty much maintained and even grew because he's even more up, like he's having this picture. He's more ripped up here than he was in Rocky in some ways. So
I think that's because he was going to carry this franchise. Now he was really the star. And I think that's why he got more shredded. And it's interesting too, where we both placed some of these, because the reason why he was my number 5, why this particular character was number 5, which by the way, my favorite scene, because I'm trying to get our favorite scenes from each of these as well. My favorite scene in Action Jackson was probably the ending fight scene between him and Delaplane. That was probably...
Yeah, I was going to say that one too. That was
just epic,
that was
man.
Good.
That was really cool. But the reason why... I was just going to say this real quick, and then I'll give it to you because this is your choice now. But the reason why he was in my number 5 was because out of all the roles, even though I love this role, I still think it was probably the most two-dimensional. of all the roles that he played. And so that's why I put it at the bottom.
Mm.
But it's your number
Yeah,
4. So you put it above Chubbs. Now, I'm going to guess it's probably because this is more the Carl Weathers that we know and that we expect, and perhaps what he's best at.
Well, I put him at 4 because so Chubbs was just like that. The reason why Chubbs was number 5 was simply because like it was so different from what we know from Carl Weathers, as far as like his iconic roles. And I think it was just uh it showed us a big part of his acting range that we never knew he had.
Mm-hmm.
However, it's still like it doesn't fit with the Carl Weathers that we know. So yes, in that regard, that's why that one was at 5. Action Jackson, kind of what you alluded to earlier, was like the whole blaxploitation. Like he was an action hero, but it was a little silly. So in some ways, it was kind of like I couldn't take it serious as some of his other
Right.
roles. You see what I'm saying? Like
I'm right there with you. That's why it was my number 5. I mean,
so
because I felt that it was probably the most two-dimensional of all of his characters. It was also because, like I said, man, it was like it was like a blaxploitation version of The Last Action Hero. If The Last Action Hero were a more serious movie, it was the same kind of vibe. It had that sort of silly action movie vibe. So you know. It's not going to be like a number 2 or number 1.
Precisely. So yeah, but I would definitely have to agree with you though. With that last scene though, was just that last action scene that he had with Delaplane, man, was phenomenal.
Well, and the thing is,
and I remember as a kid, I had to sneak to see this because remember, like, when this is 88, this, I was 4, so I really couldn't see this until like I didn't see this movie to maybe like 90, maybe 92. 91, 92, somewhere around there when I was a little bit older.
It was only like 3 or 4 years after like maybe it was released.
Yeah.
Because it came out
like
in
87
or 88. It had been 88 because when I was in Alabama, that was when I was in there. So yeah, it was 88. It was like May of 88 or something like that, or April or whatever. But yeah, it is. I mean, that's the thing. It's a good movie, and it actually has a lot of, like I said, there were a lot of really dark scenes where you're kind of like, what a weird juxtaposition. You get this, like fun, insane, he's doing all these crazy, like almost superhuman things, and they're, it almost gets cartoonish at times.
Yeah,
and then
exactly.
It turns around and, you get particularly the scenes with Delaplane, there was that, like one scene where he was talking about Vanity, like he was going to kill her after he like sleeps with her like one last time or something like that. Just the way he delivered the line. I mean, he was just so dark, and
it was this very
it was a very weird juxtaposition.
Yeah.
It
definitely had its dark turns in there, but I think that's what kind of made it interesting though, because it's like you had It's almost like how Adam Sandler's movies are, like sometimes where like Click, for example, where it starts off fun and then makes that turn, and then now all of a sudden it's like this serious, and you're like, whoa, what happened?
You're not ready. You're not ready.
Yeah.
It's kind of like it starts out Billy Madison and becomes like Uncut Gems.
Yep. There you go.
But I mean, the thing that's funny too is that aside from either the cartoony moments or like the super dark moments, there's also like just really good moments in Action Jackson. So there was a lot, it just wasn't as strong probably as it could have or should have been, but it was definitely worthy of being on our list. All right, so my number 4, of course, as we mentioned before, was the character of Dylan from Predator. And, there's a couple of scenes. Now, of course, everybody's favorite scene is basically the big handshake thing. I mean, that's like the, with the whole like biceps flaring and all that stuff. Yeah, that's the scene that most people point to when they point to their favorite scene. But there was a scene, I'm trying to remember exactly how it went, but there was a scene where he was talking about, like the jungle and just like the. It was almost like he was giving this like really creepy speech.
Like a monologue almost.
Yeah, kind of like a monologue, exactly. And it was really chilling. And you started to feel the peril that these guys were in because, see, to me, that's what made Predator so amazing. First of all, it was kind of like the Expendables before the Expendables. You had
Mm-hmm.
Jesse Ventura, you had, Bill Duke, obviously Carl
Yeah.
Weathers, Schwarzenegger, Sonny Landham.
Schneider.
It was kind of like an ensemble cast, but what was cool was how it turned from you got these guys just go on these missions all the time, and it's almost like no big deal to them. It's like, oh, it's like another day at work, But it slowly turns, and you start to. There's like a point in the movie where you start to feel the isolation and the peril that they're in. And it's just really cool when that starts to happen and then they start getting wiped out. And it's really well done. And at first, it seems like Dylan is almost two-dimensional like Jericho Jackson, but he's not. If you really look at the fact that, he knows what the mission's really about, but he has to keep it from his good friend Dutch. And it seemed like
Mm-hmm.
he was betraying them, but he himself is in the same situation. And it's just the way that they portrayed that and the way that they did that was, I thought, really cool.
Yeah, Dylan. I mean, once again, it was cool to see him, paired up with another like makers, action superstar like Arnold, you know,
Yeah, it's true
after
because
being with
that's the first
Stallone.
time. That was the first time that was really. I mean, I guess you could say, in Rocky's pair up with Stallone, so it's kind of almost the same thing,
Hmm.
right? But I know what you mean though. But I mean,
Yeah,
you know
and the
what?
fact that he's able to make
Well,
deals
you're
with those two titans.
right, and I mean, since your number three was Dylan, so we might as well just, you're talking about him. We
Keep,
might as well
keep
just keep the
it,
momentum
keep it
going,
rolling.
right? Yeah, keep it
Yeah.
rolling.
So of course, of course, Dylan, you son of a, and they do the handshake, and you're seeing both of them like kind of going into each other with the biceps, and you're just like,
Yeah. It's a
it's
bad
kind of
or
one of the few
CIA
times
got
you.
you pushing too many pencils. That's like a great line.
Yeah, and it was cool because you see kind of, especially at that time, you still had some, in some pockets, you still kind of had that racial thing in the country.
Yep.
But to see those two being like almost like brothers, and they're just like, yeah, man, and they had that almost like that unifying handshake, which was cool. Like, okay, forget what we're brothers because of what we've been through. So that was cool. And then it's also was cool to see someone actually being able to kind of like withstand against Arnold. It's
Right.
like, okay, we've always looked at Arnold as like the supreme, and you see like Carl Weathers is like, hey man, you're not the only big guy out here. So that was really cool. But Dylan's death in Predator though, like that
Oh,
scene was this.
that was brutal.
That would be yeah, man. That scene, man, it's just like, sheesh.
But again, that was basically him, he wasn't cowering from it. I mean, he started
No.
realizing like, okay, we're we're in trouble, so we have to try to do what we can to get out of this. And like you said, I mean, there was a lot of racial diversity actually in this movie when that was not necessarily a
Hmm.
popular thing. Because not only did you have Carl
Exactly.
Weathers,
Bill
and
Duke.
Schwarzenegger, so everybody could start queuing up the song Ebony and Ivory, but you also had you had Bill Duke,
Yep.
you had Sonny Landham. Sonny
Yep.
Landham was
Yeah.
was like I say, he's kind of like a American Indian type. And so you
Jesse
had
Ventura.
Jesse
Yep.
Ventura, and then of course you had oh, I forgot I think it begins with a C. I want to see it's like Carlita or something. Where you have the Hispanic actress in there too, because she was, basically playing somebody that was actually living in the village.
In Guatemala. Yeah.
Yeah. So I mean, it was actually a really cool, diverse cast that you had. And just the way that they were featuring, like you said, there's a brotherhood there. So, I mean, it actually sent a really positive message, which was a cool thing, too, I thought.
Yeah. So that was, yeah, that was definitely one of my favorite And like I said, he was kind of a he kind of almost did like what he did for Sly, as far as like being like almost like the sidekick, but not really a side character, but he's kind of like that because he's not the star of the film.
Right.
But he's almost as big as the actual star. So um he was really more of that nice support for Arnold. So I
Well, there
really
was
love
yeah, he added a marquee name, no doubt.
yeah.
You know,
Yeah,
I mean,
exactly.
I mean, yeah. Let's be honest, it was a Schwarzenegger film. I mean,
Right.
without question. But he added a lot of credibility and added a little bit of
Hmm.
weight. The whole cast did really.
Yeah.
So I mean, and like I said, it was sort of like the Expendables before the Expendables. I mean, you had pretty much a reasonable all-star cast. But
Yeah.
obviously, besides Schwarzenegger, yeah, Carl Weathers is probably the most like name guy. You
Yeah,
know,
followed
sure,
by Bill
Jesse
Duke and
Ventura
Jesse.
was known for wrestling and stuff like that. But I mean, as far as like acting and action
Hmm.
stars, he was definitely the guy in that. So yeah, if you guys haven't, like I said, if you haven't seen Predator in a long time, I mean, I can't imagine there is anybody out there that hasn't seen it. I mean, if you haven't seen it, when the show's done. You take the poll that we put up asking what your favorite role of, Carl Weathers is. And after you take the poll,
Hmm.
you immediately go on your favorite streaming service and find Predator because it really was a well done movie. It really was. And
Hmm.
it's a great Carl Weathers vehicle every bit as much as it is Schwarzenegger because he did, like I said, get to show some acting chops in that. All right, so in our little merry-go-round of shifting characters and everything, my number 3 is Chubbs.
There it
And,
is.
there's that wooden hand. And probably my favorite scene is still the whole, it's all in the hips.
Hips.
And that was the thing, I'm watching this going, wow. And the reason why it's funny because it's almost like all the stuff that you brought up, why it was your number 5, I would be flipping that as to why this is my number 3. And it's because of the fact that it does require more acting range. With my other one, number 4
Hmm.
being Dylan, number 5 being Jericho Jackson, those are more in Carl Weathers' wheelhouse. Those are the kind of characters that we've seen him play. This is probably the first time that we've seen him do something totally different. And what's funny was, yeah, at first you're kind of like, oh man, this is weird. This is like Apollo Creed, But honestly, like 10 minutes into the movie, Chubbs is his own character at this point.
Hmm.
He's you forget that's Carl Weathers. It's now Chubbs. And it just, you have to have some range to pull that off. And he pulled it off, and it was a unique character, and it was something that was different enough that whenever you're doing a comedy or anything like that, you got to have the timing, you got to be able to pull that off. It wasn't, and not to mention the fact that you're also, it's not just a comedy, it's a quirky comedy. And you have to be able to function in this quirky comedy in order to sell it. You gotta believe your role. You can't really necessarily be self-aware. You have to really be fully invested in it. And for that reason, that's why I felt his role as Chubbs was worthy of a number 3.
Yeah, I mean, definitely for all the reasons, and I could totally see why you would, go that route. And all your points stand perfectly, and I think that's that's one of the coolest things that we've got a chance to experience with Carl Weathers is the fact that we got a chance to see his actual range, and he's not just a one-dimensional or typecast type of actor where you can actually see him uh, portray different things, and you forget that. And that's what the mark of a great actor is, that when you don't see the person anymore, you see the character. and
Yep.
and that's what Carl Weathers was able to really do. And even in Arrested Development, he did this whole little sketch thing where he was basically playing himself as like a acting coach. And
Oh, I
man, he was
remember
funny.
that. Yeah, that was
Man,
hilarious.
hilarious. Yeah, man, it was just
It's funny
absolutely
because I
hilarious.
thought about that too. I mean, because there's, like I said, the psych reference that I made. There was some other comedic roles that he had that were incredible, but when it came down to it, and obviously you felt the same way. It's just like, yeah, but they don't really take out these five. As
Mm-mm.
great as some of his other roles were, they don't take out these five. But likewise, though, I can also understand why Chubbs was your number 5, because when you basically gave your reasoning, it's like, well, all right. I mean, that's true too. And that's what makes it so interesting, is the fact that Chubbs was 5 for you, 3 for me. Both of us had reasons that were kind of mirroring each other in a sense, but they were just sort of like the flip side of it. And they're both equally valid. And that's why I cannot wait to see what you guys say in the comments section. When you take our poll, obviously, you can put a comment in there, because again, look, the polls limit us to like 5 choices or something like that. So obviously we put the big 5 that we pretty much chose ourselves. But if you wanted to add somebody else in there or whatever, just put it in the comment section. You guys might think like, okay, you guys are nuts. Really, he guest starred on ER or something. So, somebody might think that was his best performance. More power to you. All right, so now let's get to your number 2. I mean, obviously, look, there's 2 big roles left. So, you know how this is going to go down. And what's interesting is you and I flip-flopped them, which is really funny.
Wow,
So,
really?
yeah, we did. So your number 2 was
Interesting.
Grief Karga.
Yep.
And, obviously, this is the reason why we're doing this celebration tonight, right? Because this is a Star
Right.
Wars show. I mean, I was going to say it was funny because, we talked about doing a general entertainment show.
And it would definitely fall under that.
And this would definitely fall under that, because we're breaking down, a bunch of films that this actor has done. And in a way, it sort of feels like what our general entertainment show might be like. But obviously, his role as Grief Karga on The Mandalorian, that's the reason why we're featuring and doing this tribute on this show. Because, I mean, let's face it, there's been a lot of actors that we love and adore, but we're not necessarily going to do a whole tribute show on them. We did do a tribute show on David Prowse. We also did The Secret Life of William Hookins. We did,
Mhm.
didn't we do some, or we at least mentioned Jeremy Bullock? I know that. I thought we did
Yep.
another tribute show to somebody that passed, though, in Star Wars. But
Yep, probably did. I mean,
we
there's a
probably
bunch
did.
of 'em.
But this is the reason why we're doing this. And of course, yes, Grief Karga. So what was so remember, favorite scene, and then of course why you are putting him at number 2.
Well, I don't care to Cargo. When I heard that, Carl Weathers was going to be in the show, I was like, okay, I wonder what character he's going to play.
I know.
And
I know.
and then
I thought the
so
same thing. I'm like, really?
you
Carl
almost expect him to be
Weathers?
the Mandalorian. Yeah, you almost expect him to be the Mandalorian. And see, once again, shows range, because this is the first time we see him more in a science fictiony, science fantasy type
That's true.
situation. So once again, this is another element where we're not used to seeing Carl Weathers in. It's still action, but it's a different type of action now, and it's a different type, literally a different world. But number one, I love the look of him. He's got that perfect white beard that's perfectly groomed, and he has that regalness. He kind of, like I said, every time I look at Carl Weathers, especially like as he's gotten older, he always reminded me of Dennis Haysbert. Like that, they could be brothers.
Yeah,
or
I could see
cousins.
that.
Like their voices, the way they, their mannerisms. I mean, they look like they could be related in some way, shape, or form.
But you're right, though.
So,
There's a lot of times where I almost expect him to be like, my name's Grief. Some folks call me Action.
Right. Yep. Yeah. And then, it was cool though. Like I mentioned earlier the fact that he could be serious, when he was first introduced, when he's talking to Mando about like the bounties, and he's like the head of this bounty hunter guild, and I'm like, okay, that's really cool. And then, he kind of has this kind of personal relationship with Mando, and then we see him come back. He pops in and out on the show, meeting up with Mando for different things, and then of course when it comes to Grogu, when he finally shows up, like he's completely enamored with Grogu. Like he's like, oh, look at the little cute little fella. Like he's all playing with him, and
Oh, I know. It's like his
then
whole
of course,
demeanor changes, and
yeah, his
you know
whole
he goes from
demeanor
like this
changes. He's
ruthless like bounty hunter guild
like kind of
guy, to
yeah,
oh, look at the little baby, that kind of thing. And yeah, it was like, whoa, use some magic hands.
yeah, and that was my favorite scene. Like when you
I
talk about
I had
favorite
a feeling
scene,
it was
that
your
was
favorite
it.
scene.
Yeah, like yeah, man. Like all right, come on, do the magic hand. Like he didn't know what was the force. He didn't know
Oh,
what
I
to call it.
know,
So he's like, yeah,
man. I mean, I have
do
to
the little
admit,
magic hand thing.
it's
I
probably my
mean, that was just
second.
priceless.
That's my second favorite scene, I think, because I mean that was just. And the other thing was, you did not expect him to say that, and that's
No,
what
not at
made it.
all.
That's what made it phenomenal.
It's almost great as like Luke Skywalker saying laser sword or something like that. And it's
Yeah.
like, what?
Oh, I know.
But so to
Like,
hear
dude,
Greek,
why? You know
what?
what though? I mean, honestly, I'm not trying to go off on a tangent here because that's not what this is about. It's a tribute to the late Carl Weathers now.
I
But
knew that was going to stir you up.
that just drove me insane. It's like
I know, me
Luke
too.
he's like a grandmaster of the Force. Laser sword is what like some, I don't know, guy in a cantina or something might call it. The guy's been
Right.
calling it a lightsaber from the time he learned what it was. And now all of a sudden he's
Exactly.
going to call it a laser sword when he's like a grandmaster. Whatever. But carry on.
but yeah, like he kind of had this whole grandfatherly thing vibe to Grogu that was kind of cute and funny, and that was because whenever like he popped up, he's like, "Hey, where's the little guy?" He wants to see him, and
Yeah, that's true.
he's like a granddad. It was hilarious. And then just to watching the relationship that he built with Mando, and he kind of became like this whole quasi almost like Lando Calrissian stand-in in a
Yeah.
way. Because he kind of
Yep.
started his own, like almost like the modeling colony. He kind of had his own thing going on, and he was running that, but he would, interject himself in certain situations to help out, Den. So I really just love different avenues of his character and getting to see him play like more of the okay, yeah, I'm a warrior kind of guy, leader, grandfather, aloof, friend. He's like all these different characters in one. And man, and that's what's it's gonna suck because now I don't know, like you said earlier, I don't know if he shot all his scenes, and of course, if they had more plans for him, well, now you can't do it.
Yeah,
We run
they're
into
gonna
the
have to
same Carrie
recast
Fisher.
him. They're gonna have to
It's a Carrie
recast
Fisher
him.
problem.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And it just
And if they do, honestly, I say they get Dennis Haysbert.
yeah, they could do that. That would actually sell it. You got to get
At least it would,
somebody that's
it's
like him,
but
man. Somebody
and
that
it has
can
the voice who
yes.
who can pull that off. And
Yeah. Yeah.
yeah.
Right. You can't get like Jaleel White or something like that. I mean, you gotta.
No, oh my
But
God,
I mean,
God, no.
but to the point that you're making though, this is what's really cool about this character is his growth, right? Because when we first meet him in season 1, he's kind of this ruthless, double-handed, double-crossing head of this bounty hunter guild. And he's not really one-dimensional, but he's very focused on, just this one aspect of his personality. And as the season and then of course seasons start to progress, he starts to take on this role as almost like a trusted ally and a friend
Yeah.
to by the
Yeah.
time we get to season 3, it's like you said, they're like Han Solo and Lando at this point. And it very much
Mhm.
mirrors the Han Solo Lando relationship, actually. There's a betrayal there. Because remember, Grief actually betrayed Din in the first season. And,
Absolutely.
and so you get this thing where eventually that betrayal turns into almost like a redemption arc, and then they just become like really tight and really cool to the point where they left them. Because that's what I'm saying. They could actually write the character of Grief out because we didn't really see him that much. And if you really stop and think about the last scene between Din and Grief, where it's just like, okay, you could settle here or whatever, there's a really good concluding point there. You could actually just go, okay, maybe if they didn't want to kill him off, they could talk about him without necessarily showing him,
Right.
But I mean, there was a good, like, conclusion there that they could move on without necessarily recasting him.
Grief's character, honestly, and think about it, I just thought about it, very much reminds me of a live action version of Sid from The Bad Batch.
Yeah, you know what? That's a good point. I didn't really think about that, but yeah, there's a lot of similarities there.
Similarities to, yeah, absolutely.
At least, I mean, right now I would say like season 1 and maybe the first part of season 2 would be kind of like Sid.
Mhm.
Whereas time goes on, I think it's a little different, but yeah, no, that's absolutely that character, that they fulfill, and it's just really cool. All right, so my number 2. Well, wait, before we get to that, we do have a chat from Ronaldo. Always like to get to the chats when we can. Ronaldo says,
Mhm.
personally, I would recast. I think the character is too important. And I could see that. I could, like I said, I could go either way on it because again, I thought that it did end in a very
Neat and clean way.
neat, clean way that you can then just go off. On the other hand, I wouldn't necessarily argue Ronaldo's point. I mean, if you wanted to
Yeah.
say, hey, this is a really vital character, we need to recast, I could see a world where that's a true thing. All right. So my number 2, because again, we kind of flip-flop them, so it's kind of a spoiler alert here, but my number 2 is Apollo. And when I get to my number 1, you'll see why Apollo is number 2 for me. But yeah, Apollo, man, I mean, this is probably his most iconic character. This is what's going to be on the headstone.
Yep.
Because, Apollo is just this iconic character that became, at first, the antagonist to the Rocky character, and then eventually the ally and friend. And to that end, my favorite scene in the whole Rocky franchise, at least where Apollo is concerned, is when he's going to fight Drago, and it's basically Rocky and Apollo's last conversation. And Rocky's trying to talk him out of doing it, and that's when, Apollo launches into this whole monologue about, I mean, if the warrior doesn't have a war to fight, they just die, or, something like that. I mean, he just goes into this, like, really amazing monologue that perfectly sums up, because remember, by the time they get to Rocky 4, you have these 2 legendary boxers that are basically now kind of past their prime. And what do you do when a boxer's past their prime? It's kind of like, well, but I still have that mentality. I still want to go up. I still want to prove I want to be the best. And I really thought that Carl Weathers did an amazing job, particularly in Rocky 4. I mean, that's not to take away from anything he's done in 1 through 3, because, there's something amazing from him in every one of those films. There's a reason why the Apollo character is iconic. But in Rocky 4, now you're starting to bring a little bit of a multi-dimensional aspect to the Apollo character, because now you're starting to deal with a little bit more weighty themes, and you have a situation where, okay, he knows, and of course Rocky knows, like, dude, you're not, especially this guy Drago, are you insane? And then of course the whole, like, he's thinking everything, and then the death scene, and then I mean, it was
Mhm.
it was one of those things that I remember seeing Rocky 4 in the theater, and I did not expect them to kill off Apollo. And I'm just like, I remember just being in the theater, just like it was almost like when Darth Vader or Han Solo died. I was just mortified, you know? And then, of course, when they started coming out with the Creed series, and now it's almost like this legacy, and how they every time they mention Apollo's name in those movies, you get a little chill. And that's because of what Carl Weathers establishes that character.
Yeah, definitely. I'm going to save majority of my comments, obviously, for the next, because it goes right into.
Go for it. We're right into the, because look, it's
Right
your number one.
Yeah.
And you know what?
Right,
For every
sweet.
single reason, I struggled with this. Like I said, when I get to my number one, I will
Make your
then
case.
yes, I will then make my case and I'll reveal it. But look, everything that I just said could very well
Yeah.
be the argument for why he's number one. Because again,
Oh,
he
absolutely.
is Carl Weathers' most iconic character. He just
Yeah.
is. So I can't argue with this.
Yeah, I mean, Apollo Creed, man. I mean, my goodness. I think Carl Weathers did a masterful job um at portraying Apollo Creed, and because basically Apollo Creed was more a reasonable facsimile of Muhammad Ali.
Yep.
That's who Carl Weathers kind of mimicked
Yes.
for that role without being too over the top. And he did just enough of Ali to not be Ali. You know what I mean? And a lot of that a lot of that was revealed in Rocky 3
Mhm.
when he actually was training Rocky and start showing him how to, have the bounce and have rhythm, and, like doing it to music, and, just that type of thing, and having that. And he was always kind of that flashy kind of guy, where Rocky was more conservative. He was more just grounded in, where Apollo, he's going to talk trash. He's going to have fun. He's going to toy and play with you. He's going to put on a show. And that's part of what Apollo was really about. It wasn't just boxing, but it's also entertaining. And that's ultimately, unfortunately, what got him killed in Rocky 4.
Exactly.
Was because it was an exhibition. He was really just trying to. It wasn't even supposed to go that way, because it was the exhibition.
Yeah,
and it just went
Ivan
left.
Drago was a little bit intense on that one.
Yeah, it was,
and that's what was cool about it too. Was there was that one punch, and Apollo's like, "Dude, what are you doing? It's an exhibition.
Like,
calm down."
Right. Almost reminds me of when Rocky fought Thunderlips, and he was just like,
Yeah.
"Hey man, this guy's really trying to hurt me." And then at the end, he's like, "Oh man, that was great, man. That was fun."
I know.
Yeah, dude.
That was like one of the best. I will say that Rocky 4 is still probably my favorite. So the way it breaks down is the original Rocky, from a cinematic film snob point of view, is the best.
Mhm.
Rocky 3, I think, is probably the most underrated of the franchise. Rocky 4 is still probably my favorite. It can flip flop.
3 is my favorite, but I would say 4 is very emotional on so many different fronts.
Did you see the director's cut, by the way?
A 4?
Yeah. It's a totally different movie, man.
No, I haven't. I don't think so.
You gotta see it. It's a completely different movie. So what Sylvester Stallone did was he went in, and he wasn't too nuts about the over-the-top 80s-ish tone to it. That really wasn't even though he directed that one, and he likes it, over the years, he was just kind of like, it sort of sticks out of the Rocky series as just kind of like this bombastic, I mean, look, the movie came out in 86 or whatever. You definitely know that. So what he did was he actually went, like, he cut out all the robot scenes with Paulie. He put in a ton of extra footage and expanded a bunch of the Apollo scenes and all that stuff. He re-edited the fight scenes to where they were a lot more realistic and took all the crazy sound effects out and all this other stuff. He literally went and made it feel more like the first Rocky movie. And it's a completely different film. I mean, this isn't one of those situations where, there's an extra, like 10 minutes or in there where there's like a couple of extended scenes. Completely different film. And I highly recommend anybody that hasn't seen the director's cut of Rocky IV, that's another one, right? I think I chased everybody away and said, you gotta watch like Predator or something. It's like, okay, well, when you're done with Predator, cue up the director's cut of Rocky IV. And it really intensifies a lot of what you were talking about and a lot of what I was talking about, because Rocky 3 was really cool because of the fact that, that was when Apollo and Rocky became friends. And there was a lot of moments in there, with, of course, Mr. T, and then, of course, the funny thing with Thunderlips and all that stuff. And you had, there's just like I said, I still say that Rocky 3 is probably the most underrated. However, Rocky IV, the thing that made that to me was, and this is what I think made the Apollo death so jarring to me, was the fact that Apollo and Rocky finally had the friendship you've been waiting like 3 movies for. Very easy, just like old friends, joking around,
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, well, that's the thing about 3, and that's why 3 was my favorite, was because, you see, like, okay, Apollo had something that Rocky didn't, and he knew he didn't, but he knew this is what you would need to beat somebody like that.
Right.
And so he basically gave him the secrets, like, look, I'm done, but that means, I'll give you my secrets to show you how to add this to your toolbox so you can do what you do, but now I'm giving you something extra that you can keep in your back pocket that you can utilize against fighters like a Clubber Lang. And I really love the whole, him and showing him like, okay, Rocky's always used to, we're seeing him chopping wood, he's punching, slabs of meat, but, to get speed, like, okay. And it's funny, like, one of the greatest lines to me was like, was Paulie. He was like, man, he's trying to train him like he's a black fighter. He's like, dude, he doesn't have any rhythm. He's not, we can't do this. He's like, no, you can. It's like, you just have to, and it's, and Paulie was just like, yeah, man, this is nuts, man. Like, what are we doing here? And it was just so funny when Rocky walked into that gym and it's like, you see all the hungry looks in those boxers' faces. And like, he's like, yeah, see, you got to get that Eye of the Tiger back. And that's, of course, when we get the Eye of the Tiger song. I mean, we get that in there. And then, of course, the famous line, which unfortunately we have to say now due to Carl Weathers being gone, but there is no tomorrow. And this is like, you gotta, he's like, all right, and the sense of urgency that now you see Apollo push him, and he's basing it on like, look, when you fought me, this is what I saw. You don't have that anymore. And that's what you have to get back in order to beat, because otherwise this guy is going to completely, and I don't want to see that happen to you because I know what you're worth. And that was just so moving to see that flip. But I agree with you for Rocky IV, the thing that was really, like you said, we have been waiting. Now you finally get Apollo and Rocky having that relationship we always wanted them to see. And it was like, man, and it was so short-lived.
That's it.
Based off something that was stupid. It wasn't even supposed to happen.
No, and I mean, and actually, this is piggybacking off of what you're saying about 3, which is why I love 4 so much. Because again, 3 and 4 kind of flip-flop. I mean, I'm actually a big fan of 5 too. That's another one that I think a lot of people they sleep on it because of just some of the elements of it, especially because it followed 4, and it was kind of like
Yeah.
street fight. What is this, But there's
Yeah.
a lot of subtleties in 5 that I would actually argue about, but 3 and 4 realistically are probably like the 2 go-tos, and really they're kind of like one film in a lot of ways. But what I loved about 4, and this piggybacks on what you're saying, is that it's almost the opposite. Because in 3, it's like you said, Apollo, is looking at Rocky and how Rocky's kind of lost it a little bit. And he's saying, okay, first of all, we got to get what you had back. Secondly,
Mhm.
you're a great fighter, but now I'm going to give you tools to make you a smarter fighter. And
Mhm.
now you're going to have more strategy. And now you're going to be able to do
Yeah.
this stuff. And then, of course, when you look at 4, after Apollo's tragic death, and now Rocky wants to avenge him, they don't really, it's not really on the nose the way that they put it, even in the theatrical version. But you could tell it's kind of like he's taken all that stuff that he's learned from Apollo in 3, and now he's able to train himself, of course, with what was the character's name? Was it Duke? That was basically Apollo's trainer.
Apollo's trainer. Yeah.
Yeah, and then he ended up training Rocky through like Rocky 6. It's
Mhm.
but he was able to sort of continue on and take the trainer role, but Rocky had already learned. That's why he was able to come up with all that, the weird stuff in what I still say is the best training montage of any of the Rocky films, was the whole Rocky 4 one. But
Mhm.
that was what made it even better too, because now Rocky was trying to appeal to Apollo the very same way that Apollo was appealing to Rocky in 3.
Yeah.
It was almost like the role was reversed. It was different reasoning, obviously, because in 3, Rocky had lost his edge, and then he also needed to improve as a fighter. In Rocky 4, Apollo felt useless when he wasn't fighting anymore. And Rocky was trying to say, dude, it shouldn't be about all this. You did your bit for
Right.
king and country. Let's go by the
Yeah.
pool and chill. And Apollo
Yeah.
couldn't let it go. And of course, it cost him his life. And now
Yeah.
Rocky doesn't have his friend. That's honestly
Mhm.
is a little bonus thing I want to throw in there, because I actually was in tears when I first saw this. When I went and saw Creed 2, which of course, as we all know, Ivan Drago's son is now fighting
Mhm.
Adonis Creed. So you have a
Mhm.
little bit of like the two sons now,
Yeah.
And the part that just got to me, where like tears are streaming down my face, is the brilliant thing they did was when they flip-flopped the Rocky 4 thing, and now, Victor Drago is just getting pummeled. And then the love of the father comes through, and now Ivan Drago throws in the towel much the same way Rocky did for Apollo.
Mhm.
And,
Yeah.
then he's like hugging him, going, I'm like kind of choking up now. That was just it was a brilliant, moving scene that I'm like, wow, dude, this is stellar writing right here. And
Yeah.
again, this is all because of the foundation that was laid through the characters of Rocky and Apollo. And you can't just have any actor play the Apollo role.
Yeah, Carl Weathers brought so much dimension and depth to that character with how he portrayed himself in one. And like, first, in one, he was very arrogant. Two,
Right.
he was like, okay, he was still arrogant, but now he respected Rocky
Mhm.
more, but he still had that edge. And what's even great is, like, one of the themes I love throughout the Rocky series is that, and even in the Creed series, it's like when they kept bringing up, like, yeah, I heard you guys had like the secret match with like nobody around, like, who won, and it was just like, and we never, and of course we all got to saw that ding ding, and then it's like
Yep. And
they
then
both throw the first
the
punch,
leg
and then
still.
and then it just goes off, and you're just like,
Dylan!
oh man, right.
It's Apollo,
So, I
you
mean,
son of a yeah.
So it's just like, Carl Weathers, man, has just given us so many cool moments, man, in these films. And
That's
man,
true, actually. we never really stop and think about that. But Carl Weathers really, again, it's like if you stop and think about it, these are really his 5 iconic roles. And granted, any actor would kill for just one of them, right?
Right.
But it's not like his body of work was compared to like some of these other action stars like that vast or anything like that. But what he did was very significant and gave us a lot. Let me get this chat from Ronaldo in real quick. He says, I do believe Apollo is his best role. He totally nailed it. Even people that are not familiar with his other work know about Apollo. And that's why I said, look, you know,
hands down.
I mean, I can't argue with putting Apollo at number 1. I wouldn't do that. You know, I wouldn't because exactly. I mean, this is iconic role. You do have
your number 1.
I wouldn't argue with it, but I didn't choose it. I actually went with Greef Karga, which is kind of a surprising thing. I think that most people would be like, "Oh yeah." I mean, first of all, in my defense, I did have Apollo at number 2, and I also made some very compelling points about Apollo. So
true story.
There is that. But the reason why I put Greef Karga in number 1, and it's the only reason. Look, I'm not stupid. I know that Apollo's his most iconic role. Apollo is probably one of my favorite characters in cinema. And I'm the guy that I'm like watching, you know, Creed and Creed 2 and all that. And every time they say Apollo's name or like show his belt or something, I get like these little like goosebumps and everything. Mm-hmm. So look, I'm on board with Apollo. Don't get me wrong. It's just that, again, I weighted this list according to performances and the difficulties of the roles and how multidimensional they are. And it's kind of like what we said about Greef Karga, man. He goes from, first of all, there's the growth of him going from a more one-dimensional type character to showing all these other sides of him. The second thing is he has to play action, comedy, drama, all of these things in one character. Mm-hmm. And that takes an immense amount of acting chops to do that. You know, the role of Greef Karga is just more multidimensional and, frankly, in a lot of cases, more interesting than Apollo, as iconic as Apollo is. And there was a lot of different things. Now, of course, you know, we're going for our favorite scenes, right? And yours, of course, was a Magic Hands. That is definitely, like, that was my favorite scene until season 3 when you had that pirate standoff. That became my favorite scene. Because once again, if you go back and rewatch that scene, and if anybody wants to do it, look, I'm sure it's on YouTube. Like, everything's on YouTube. And a lot of times, I remember when we were reviewing The Mandalorian, sometimes instead of going back, you know, on Disney Plus, I would just, you know, if I wanted to like research a scene or whatever, I would just punch it up on YouTube really quick. So I'm sure the scene that I'm talking about, but there was a whole scene basically where these pirate guys used to drink at this bar. Well, now Greef turned it into a school, and they're like, no, we're going to go in there and have a drink. And Greef is kind of like, no, you're not. And there was that whole standoff, and just the tension, the eventual action. Of course, Din is kind of like standing by waiting to do stuff. I mean, it was just hands down a really stellar scene in my opinion. And it was also something that really showed, because like you said, you know, he starts out being the head of a bounty hunter guild, and he's a little bit ruthless. And then he starts to turn a little bit more compassionate, a little bit more empathetic, and he actually finds a new purpose. He's like, oh, yeah, you know, now I'm not just, you know, scamming. I really want to take this town and make it into something and build a life for myself and build a life for these people.
Yeah.
I just got to give that the number 1 spot. You know, I mean, there's just more to it than that. Apollo's totally iconic, but I can't put that above what it takes to play Grief Karga. Not to mention it's a Star Wars show.
Well, and here's another feather, to add to your synopsis as to why you picked Grief Karga. But one of the things that's very underrated and people often forget about Carl Weathers is he's also a director. And he's also directed
Yes.
some
I actually
stuff.
forgot
He's
that.
he actually directed the Siege
Oh, yeah.
episode on The Mandalorian.
Yep.
So that's another piece that's another element to Carl Weathers that often doesn't get talked about, is that he's often produced, like in television and some films. He's been a director, and watching him, I remember they were showing, they were actually doing that whole Mandalorian. I think it was the gallery. I think they were talking, and they had Carl Weathers on there, and he was actually talking about his experience, you know, being on set in Star Wars and how he grew up. How he, I won't say grew up, but he, of course, was a fan of Star Wars and things like that, and bringing something unique to that universe, and then to actually being able to direct one of the better episodes of that show too. Once again, with him being an actor and director in the same sense, I mean, it just shows a wealth of talent that Carl Weathers had, and so we were very lucky to be able to experience that from him.
Yeah, 100%. I mean, again, like I said, if you guys, I mean, obviously we've been doing this tribute the whole hour, but we lost him last night. He passed away in his sleep. Nobody still knows the cause of death yet, but it's a tremendous loss. It really is. I mean, this one kind of hurts a little, and it's funny because this is one of those things where you don't necessarily think of Carl Weathers like at the top of your mind when you're thinking of anything. It's almost like one of those old friends, like, oh, it's Carl Weathers, he's in this. Or in the case of, when he started playing Grief Karga, we're like, oh yeah, he's gonna be in The Mandalorian, huh? Wonder who he's playing. And once again, he knocks it out of the park, and that's what he does. He brings 110% to every role that he does or did.
Yeah.
And that's going to be missed. A lot of times now you have actors that they're totally dependent on technology. They can't, we're losing a lot of our good classic actors, and it just,
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely.
it's a shame, man.
It was a different time. It was a different time back then. You really had to, like you say, you had to bring it. And when you look to your right and your left, and you got, you're standing next to Arnold Schwarzenegger, and you're standing next to Sylvester Stallone, and you're standing next to, all these phenomenal actors, Giancarlo Esposito. You're standing next to, and some of these directors, and Carl Weathers still has been able to remain relevant since the 70s, and he's still, like, up until his death, I mean, he was still relevant. And that's something you can't say for a lot of actors from his era, that they're still able to do what they do at a high level. And that's one of those things that's like, man, your Clint Eastwoods, your Sylvester Stallones, your Harrison Fords, like those titans, those people who have been doing this for 30, 40, 50, saying years, it's like, wow, and so I think that's really going to be that really should be the dash between the numbers of, from the time he was born until the time, until yesterday when he transitioned. But that small dash was filled with so many great memories, so many great iconic moments, roles, and that his legacy will always live through his artwork, because he, like you said, Eric, he brought 100%, 110% every time.
Yeah, and I mean, you stop and think about it, and you're right. Clint Eastwood's like 90 something. It's amazing he's actually still kind of active, honestly. So, a
Right.
lot of these guys, I don't want to be morbid or anything like that, but, let's just say that there's more time behind them than ahead of them. And we just have to appreciate what these people bring. And the talent and the enjoyment and everything that they bring, and just the work ethic, and just being, an overall cool guy. And that was what Carl Weathers was, and it really is a shame to lose him so unexpectedly. And as far as I'm concerned, he was, I mean, his best work may have actually been ahead of him, because, like you said, he was knocking it out of the park. Now, sure, he had lulls in his career, or maybe not even necessarily lulls. It was really more like he just went behind the scenes more, and then he stepped out. And I was really happy when he got the role in The Mandalorian. First, like you said, it's kind of like, yeah, really? I wonder who he's going to... there was a little bit of that almost bewilderment happening, but then it turned into, yeah, you know what?
I'm one of our favorite characters.
Yeah, exactly. And really, I was on board with it, and I was excited, and I was happy to see him coming back out. Like, yeah, you know what? We haven't seen Carl Weathers in a while. This is kind of cool, So, yeah, it's a shame, but at least look, we have this just amazing legacy of work that he's left us, and we can always go back to that and appreciate that. And again, obviously thinking about his family and his friends at this time, because they didn't just lose an iconic actor, they lost a father or a brother or so I mean, or a friend, I mean, that's just, you have to think of the human element of this too. I mean, we're over there going, oh, I wonder what they're going to do with Grief Karga's character in, season 4 of The Mandalorian. And meantime, I lost my best friend, it's kind of, right. I mean, there is that, so I just think that that's something that, that we got to think about. Let me get this last chat in here from Ronaldo. This is just the fact that Carl Weathers is in Star Wars is very cool. And yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, exactly. Apollo made it to Star Wars.
Yeah. Now, who would have thought that? Right? Exactly. Like when you're watching him in in like Rocky 3 or something back in 83, that the same year that Return of the Jedi was out. Kind of like, yeah, you know what? Probably be in Star Wars one day. It's like, no.
Yeah, right.
But look, speaking of which, we have a poll on the channel, and we have some choices up. And so what we'd like you guys to do when the show is done is go ahead and take the poll and let us know what your favorite character that Carl Weathers played. What was it? Let us know. And because I got hammered on the last poll by a couple people where they're like, hey man, where's Tales of the Jedi? Where's, because there was some choices that we even talked about in our upcoming projects thing that I did not put in the poll. So just, keep your pants on. Just, if there's a character that Carl Weathers played that you don't see as one of the choices, put it in the comment section. Say, hey, this is, I think, my favorite role that he played. Because the guy he acted in more than like 80 projects. So, obviously he played more than 5 characters. He did actually reprise his role as Chubbs in Little Nicky. So that was kind of funny. So, there was
also Combat Carl in Toy Story,
Yes. That was another one. And that was another really great role. I mean, he's not gonna take out Apollo, but or I mean, but you know what? There's some people that might have grown up with Toy Story that would probably say, I don't know who Jericho Jackson is. Combat Carl's my guy. So if that's the case, put that in the comment section. We really want to know who your favorite Carl Weathers role was, or Carl Weathers character. And in the meantime, obviously hit the like button, hit the subscribe button if you guys like this and you want to see us continue. That'd be fantastic. Of course, you can join our Discord. We got a couple new members. Been chatting. Actually been finding out about some High Republic books that would be good to read. And so the Discord channel is like the perfect way that we can communicate and share ideas and maybe get introduced to new things, whether it's Star Wars or anything else, because we got like forums and everything for anything in our Discord. So, be sure to check that out. Maybe, I don't know. Do we have anything pre-planned for Monday, or are we going to just try to do the Obi-Wan thing?
I think you probably could do the Obi-Wan thing Monday.
Yeah, maybe we'll do the Obi-Wan thing Monday.
Sorry, pretty
There's
much
like,
ready to go anyway.
Yeah, well, there's, so with the Obi-Wan, what's the deal with it?
What do you mean?
Well, I mean, we just want to preview it for people.
Oh, well, basically they were...
It's like, what do you mean? Guess we better work this out before Monday, right?
Feel like Vader, what do you mean? I know. So there was talks about season 2 of Obi-Wan Kenobi.
Right, and I know Ewan McGregor's been wanting season 2 of Obi-Wan Kenobi. That's a funny thing about all these prequel guys, right? It's like they're getting a little bit of taste of being back in the Star Wars universe, and they're like, oh, you know what? We like this. And they want to keep coming back. Like Hayden Christensen is practically lobbying to be in just about anything these days. And they're saying yes, right? And so Ewan McGregor's the same thing. The problem is that Obi-Wan gets killed. So there's somewhat of an issue there's only so far you can go. It's like, look, dude, we're not going to bring you back for, here's what happened the week before A New Hope. I mean, it's like, no, that's not, we respect the fact that you want to play Obi-Wan, go do some like opening of grocery stores or something. I don't know, or a shopping mall or whatever. But we're going to talk about that. We're going to talk about the viability of whether or not Lucasfilm even wants to make a season 2. And of course, we're also going to talk about should they make a season 2? Because those are not necessarily the same, right? And so, of course, we want you guys to weigh in on that as well. Let us know. Monday, join us live. We'll be on at 8, presumably. And yeah, let us know at that time. Check us out, and we'll talk about whether or not they should do a season 2 of the Obi-Wan series or not. All right, so with that, we'll see you guys Monday, 8 o'clock. I'm Eric Vansel.
I'm Daryl Sanders.
May the Force be with you.
Always.
Head to Head, a Star Wars podcast. Be sure to follow us on Twitter @HeadToHeadSW. Submit your questions for our next show. Visit our official website at headtoheadswpodcast.com. Until next time, may the Force be with you, always.